Introduction to an overview of estate planning. This is part 1. Let's see how I'll fare. I made this with the help of Copilot. So number 1, or the first question, estate planning is best described as the process by which a person can avoid all legal involvement by relying solely on verbal instructions to family members, decide who will receive their property after death, but only if they have significant wealth, create legal documents that only distribute assets and do not address the disability or personal wishes, provide for themselves and their loved ones during disability, direct how their assets are distributed, minimize taxes and costs, plan for care, communicate personal values, and support meaningful causes. I think that's the answer. Oh, that's the answer, I'm sure. What is an estate in estate planning and taxation? Only the real property a person owns, all of a person's relevant assets. I think this is the answer. Only assets that pass through probate. Only assets jointly owned with a spouse. What is the gross estate? Only assets physically located in the decedent's home, the value of all assets owned or controlled by the decedent at death. I think that's the answer. Only assets with designated beneficiaries, assets that are exempt from taxation. What is the basic exclusion amount? A fixed amount that never changes, the amount of debt that can be forgiven at death, the amount that can pass tax-free during life or at death. I think that's the answer. The amount of income tax owed by the estate. What is a taxable estate? Any estate that includes real property, an estate that has unpaid debts, an estate that exceeds the basic exclusion amount. I think this is the answer. An estate that has no deductions applied. What are deductions in estate tax calculations? Penalties applied to estates that violate, eligible transfers that reduce the taxable estate, fees paid to the executor, income earned by the estate after death. B, I guess. Not sure. In a guardianship or conservatorship context, what does the term estate refer to? Only the person's real property, only assets that pass through probate, the assets of a living person who cannot manage their own affairs, assets owned jointly with a spouse. C, or third option. Why might the terms guardianship and conservatorship cause confusion? They are outdated terms, no longer used in any state. They mean the same thing everywhere in the United States. Different jurisdictions use the terms differently. Third choice. They only apply to minors. Which of the following is part of a probate estate? Life insurance proceeds with a named beneficiary, jointly owned property with right of survivorship, bank account held only in the deceased's name, retirement account with a designated beneficiary. Wait, which of them is part of a probate? A? Oh, sorry. C? Yeah, C. Haha, not sure. Which of the following best describes how assets in a trust estate are typically handled after the grantor's death? They must go through the probate court for distribution. They automatically pass to the state government. They are distributed according to the terms of the trust outside of probate. They are frozen indefinitely until a judge releases them. DC. Trust estate, right? Okay. What does it mean if a person dies testate? They died without leaving any will. They died with a valid will covering at least part of their assets. Their estate automatically passes to the state Their estate is always fully distributed through probate. Second option. What does it mean if a person dies intestate? They died with a valid will covering all assets. They died without a valid will. Their estate is exempt from taxes. Their estate is automatically distributed to charity. Which of the following best describes partial testacy and partial intestacy? A will that disposes of the entire estate. No will at all, so the estate is fully intestate. A will that covers some assets but leaves others undisposed. That's the answer. A will that is invalid due to improper signing. What is the general term for a person who makes a last will and testament? Testator. The other choices would be executor, beneficiary, trustee, testator. In some states, what gender-specific term is used for a female will maker? Testatrix, executrix, testatrix. The answer, administratrix, manufacturess. What is the formal definition of an heir? Someone legally entitled to inherit under estate intestacy law, anyone who receives property under a will, any close friend of the deceased, a person named as trustee. When someone dies intestate without a will, who does state law generally favor first? Distant cousins, spouse and children, neighbors, charitable organizations, spouse and children. If a person dies without a will and has no living relatives, who usually becomes the final default beneficiary? The state government, that's the answer. The executor, the trustee, the deceased's employer. Which of the following terms can also describe someone who receives an inheritance? Devotee, legatee, beneficiary, all of the above is the answer. Which statement best describes how intestacy rules distribute assets? They follow a fixed order of relatives, starting close and moving outward. I think this is the answer. They always give property to the executor. They allow the deceased's friends to decide distribution. They automatically donate assets to charity. A trust is best defined as a contract between two businesses, a fiduciary arrangement where a trustee holds assets for beneficiaries. That's the answer. A loan agreement between a bank and a client, a type of corporation formed for a profit. The person who establishes a trust is called a trustee, beneficiary, protector, settler, also known as truster, grantor, or trust maker. Which of the following is the main responsibility of a trustee? To hold and manage trust assets for beneficiaries. That's the answer. To benefit personally from trust assets. To establish the trust. To appoint the settler. Who is the beneficiary in a trust arrangement? The person who creates the trust, the person or entity that receives benefits from trust assets. That's the answer. The person who manages the trust, the optional advisor to the trust. Which statement about roles in a trust is correct? One person can never serve in more than one role. The settler, trustee, and beneficiary must always be three different people. One person can serve as settler, trustee, and beneficiary simultaneously. That's the answer. The trustee must always be a bank. What is the role of a trust protector, also called trust advisor or trust director? To manage trust assets directly, to establish the trust, to provide oversight and limited powers, such as removing or appointing trustees. That's the answer. To receive distributions from the trust. Why might a settler include a trust protector in the trust document? To add flexibility and oversight without needing court involvement. That's the answer. To ensure the protector benefits financially from the trust. To replace the trustee in managing assets. To serve as the sole beneficiary. Let's see what score I'll get. See the score. 25 over 26. This should be which one I got incorrectly. So estate planning is best described as the process by which a person can, so the answer is provide for themselves and their loved ones during disability, direct how their assets are distributed, minimize taxes and costs, plan for care, communicate personal values, and support meaningful causes. Estate planning is a comprehensive, proactive process. It allows a person to ensure they and their loved ones are cared for during a period of disability, decide what they have, who receives it, and how and when it is given, reduce taxes, court costs, and unnecessary attorney's fees, plan for their own care and the care of dependents, communicate their hopes, fears, dreams, values, and aspirations to loved ones. That's nice. Support the causes and organizations that matter most to them. What is an estate? In estate planning and taxation, so it's all of a person's relevant assets. An estate includes all of a person's relevant assets, not just real property or probate assets. It is the total collection of what a person owns or controls at death. What is the gross estate? So it's the value of all assets owned or controlled by the decedent at death. I don't know. I don't have any feedback. What is the basic exclusion amount? So it's the amount that can pass tax-free during life or at death. The basic exclusion amount is the annually adjusted amount that can pass by a lifetime gift or at death without triggering federal estate taxes. What is a taxable estate? An estate that exceeds the basic exclusion amount. So a taxable estate is the portion of the estate above the basic exclusion amount, meaning it is subject to federal transfer taxes. What are deductions in estate tax calculations? Excuse me. These are eligible transfers that reduce the taxable estate. So deductions such as the charitable deduction or unlimited marital deduction are eligible transfers that reduce the taxable estate, lowering or eliminating estate tax liability. Excuse me. In a guardianship or conservatorship context, what does the term estate refer to? So these are assets of a living person who cannot manage their own affairs. When a person is unable to manage their own affairs and is placed under a supervised guardianship or conservatorship, their assets become part of the guardianship estate, even though they are still alive. Why might the terms guardianship and conservatorship cause confusion? Because different jurisdictions may use the terms differently. So the terms vary by jurisdiction. Some states use guardianship for minors and conservatorship for adults, while others use the terms differently. California, for example, used this child-adult distinction. Which of the following is part of a probate estate? Bank account held only in the deceased's name. So assets like life insurance proceeds and retirement accounts pass directly to the named beneficiary. Jointly owned property transfers automatically to the surviving owner. A bank account held solely in the deceased's name cannot be transferred without probate or estate administration, making it part of the probate estate. Which of the following best describes how assets in a trust estate are typically handled after the grantor's death? So they are distributed according to the terms of the trust outside of probate. Assets held in a properly established trust generally bypass the probate process. Instead of being subject to court oversight, they are managed and distributed by the trustee in accordance with the instructions laid out in the trust document. This allows for faster, more private, and often less costly transfer of property compared to probate proceedings. What does it mean if a person dies testate? They died with a valid will covering at least part of their assets. Testate means the decedent left a valid last will and testament. The will may cover all or only part of the estate, but it directs how those assets are distributed. What does it mean if a person dies intestate? they died without a valid will. Intestate means there is no valid last will and testament. In this case, state law determines how the estate is distributed among heirs. Which of the following best describes partial testacy and partial intestacy? It means a will that covers some assets but leaves others undisposed. Partial intestacy occurs when a will directs distribution of only part of the estate. The remainder not covered by the will is distributed under intestacy laws. This often happens with incomplete or do-it-yourself wills. What is the general term for a person who makes a last will and testament? Testator. The person who creates and signs a valid last will and testament is called a testator. This term applies regardless of gender in most states. In some states, what gender-specific term is used for a female will maker? Answer: testatrix. While testator is the standard term, some jurisdictions historically used the gender-specific word testatrix to refer to a female who makes a will. Modern practice generally favors the gender-neutral term testator. So this is the one that I got incorrect. What is the formal definition of an heir? Someone legally entitled to inherit under state intestacy law. If anyone received property. So it's the first option. Any close friend of the deceased, a person named as trustee. Someone. Okay. So correct answer is first option. An heir is specifically defined as a person who would inherit as when someone dies without a valid will according to state intestacy statutes. Okay. When someone dies intestate without a will, who does state law generally favor first? Spouse and children. Intestacy rules prioritize close relatives, beginning with the surviving spouse and children before moving outward to parents, siblings, and more distant family members. If a person dies without a will and has no living relatives, who usually becomes the final default beneficiary? The state government. When no heirs can be found under intestacy law, the estate typically escheats to the state, making the government the final default beneficiary. Which of the following terms can also describe someone who receives an inheritance? All of the above. So, in addition to heir, the terms legatee, devotee, and beneficiary are used to describe individuals who receive property or benefits from an estate. Which statement best describes how intestacy rules distribute assets? They follow a fixed order of relatives, starting close and moving outward. Intestacy statutes create categories of relatives, beginning with spouse and children, then parents, siblings, and progressively more distant relatives. This ensures a structured distribution when no will exists. A trust is best defined as a fiduciary arrangement where a trustee holds assets for beneficiaries. A trustee is a fiduciary arrangement in which a trustee holds and manages assets on behalf of one or more beneficiaries. Okay? The person who establishes a trust is called settlor, also known as trustor, grantor, or trust maker. The settlor, also called trustor, grantor, or trust maker, depending on jurisdiction, is the individual who creates the trust and transfers assets into it. Which of the following is the main responsibility of a trustee? To hold and manage trust assets for beneficiaries. The trustee holds legal title to the assets and manages them according to the trust terms, always in the best interest of the beneficiaries. Who is the beneficiary in a trust arrangement? The person or entity that receives benefits from trust assets. Beneficiaries are individuals, entities, or other trusts that receive benefits from the trusts, such as distributions of or rights to use property. Which statement about roles in a trust is correct? One person can serve as settlor, trustee, and beneficiary simultaneously. A single person can wear multiple hats in a trust, for example, being both the settlor and initial beneficiary, or even serving as a trustee as well. What is the role of a trust protector, also called trust advisor or trust director? To provide oversight and limited powers, such as removing or appointing trustees. Excuse me. A trust protector is not a trustee but has limited powers, often including directing trustees, removing them, or appointing new ones. This adds flexibility and can save time and money compared to court intervention. Why might a settlor include a trust protector in the trust document? To add flexibility and oversight without needing court involvement. A trust protector provides oversight and flexibility. They can act if a trustee is underperforming, avoiding costly and lengthy court proceedings. Wow, that's 21 minutes.